And I found out he doesn't even have a computer. So, but he was serious, and the problem was he's getting lobbied by Hollywood, he's getting lobbied by law enforcement, he's getting lobbied by everybody who says that anonymity is a problem. If you solve the anonymity problem and force people to have licenses to use the internet, we'll all be safe. And everything points to that, so it's something that's being chopped away at. I don't know if you know the word boogeyman. It's kind of a English, weird, colloquial word, but it's kind of the scary monster that the parents use to scare the kids into behaving. It's like, beware the boogeyman. And so what all of these guys do is they have their little boogeyman. So Hollywood and the big software guys always talk about, well, sharing is stealing. And if you steal, that's bad for the economy. We can't make business. And in fact, Hollywood said that software pirates feed terrorism. It gets all linked together. But this is one of the big boogeymen. So when you talk about open source and sharing, they'll always make you look like you're anti-business or you're a terrorist or something like that. The other boogeyman is that terrorists and child pornographers use the internet. This was a big one. Over in March 11th, we had a conference at Madrid. It was 1 year anniversary of the terrorist attack. And Kofi Annan and everyone was there. But this is like a big theme. People really think that if they shut down the internet, terrorism and child pornography will go away. And I think that the problem is that you get, when you, like a politician gets up and says, well, we want this, so you must be for child pornography, or you must be pro-terrorism. And it's kind of this rhetoric that's very difficult, but this is what you are encountering or will be encountering. The other stupid idea is the idea of the intelligent network. Telephone companies say, oh, well, you can't do voice over IP, we need quality of service, or you're gonna get so much, the children will be exposed to all this terrible content. But all kinds of the network guys are lobbying to try to make it sound like we need an intelligent network, when in fact we just need them to push the bits. And they just want to make some money back. This is the other bad idea. So let me talk a little bit about, without it just pointing out the problems, some of what we can do. And again, in Rob and Frank's talk, they have a lot of what we can do, which I think is really important. And I'd like everyone to think about what we can do when they listen to people's talks. And one of the important things is that copyright and a lot of digital rights management things are hampering the ability for people to share content. And one of the key elements of free speech is the ability to transmit and have discussions and things like that. The big problem is a lot of constitutions in a lot of countries protect the press. Because back in the old days, presses were people like individuals who printed things like Thomas Paine. They were more like bloggers. But now they're multinational corporations that really don't need protecting. But one of the things that they use is they use copyright, because they treat all content as if it were some commercial product. So one example is Greenwald, who's a documentary producer, wanted to get video clips of George Bush for his documentary to do a critique. And NBC, I think it was, said, oh, we can't, it's copyrighted content. You know, and the problem is text. We have a long history of using text for doing free speech and having discussion. In most countries, text is fairly protected in terms of the ability to have some kind of fair use. But video, for instance, is very difficult. And if you look at all the cool movies, the political messages on the internet these days with video, video is a really important part of the message. Podcasting is an important part of the message. You can't even sample a sliver of a song, at least in America right now. And so one of the things we need to think about is how can we create Creative Commons, I talked about last year, is one idea to make your content more open, licenses. I don't have it on here, I have it on a different slide, but Wikipedia is another example, blog is another example, but I'm not going into detail here, but the copyright is one of the things that's holding back free speech, and we need to remember. We need to keep the network open, and we need to keep the network one. And anyone who's an anti-ICANN guy, we can have it out in the hall later, but I will say that there are many things that ICANN needs to improve, but it is somewhat unilateral because of a momentum that they have from the United States. But there are only a few Americans on the board. 8 of the 15 are independently elected through this a fairly open process, open enough for somebody like me to get in, right? I can say whatever I want, and anyone can show up, take the public mic, and speak, and there has to be a response. And it still has many problems, but if you compare it to the ITU, or there's a session later on the WSIS process. If you look at the process that the governments use, where it's one country, one vote, a lot of it is about diplomacy, and these votes are often captured by telephone monopolies. Go to an ITU meeting and try to decide whether you would rather have these guys running it or not before you decide not to try to fix ICANN. ICANN, I think, is fixable, and it requires participation. And the other thing I would say, because I know Andy was on the board and other things, it's changing. It's changing a lot. And if you participated several years ago, try again, because the problem right now is they're trying to take control of the internet away from the bottom-up process into a top-down process. And ICANN has its problems, but it's still at least focused on trying to create a consensus process. That's my pitch for ICANN. The other, I just tacked it on here, but free spectrum, this is another area that a lot of people talk about, but something that is really, really important, and it's a very local thing as well. I don't know if you saw, like in Philadelphia, the city tried to do a municipal Wi-Fi network, and I think it was one of the telephone companies came and sued them. Eventually, the telephone company lost. But first, it's the normal junk band that we're given right now, which is crap anyway. But eventually, what we want is we want the television networks and the telephone networks to give back the spectrum. And this is something that's quite political, but really, really important for creating an open network that's not controlled by television companies and telephone companies. And I think supporting open source and free software and sharing, this is, again, something that you have to think about in a daily way. And what's important here, I think, is that a lot of people seem to think that that open source can't be business, that it's stealing money from artists, or it's stealing money from people who have spent so much time on their inventions and things like that. Well, there are people who make money from open source. There are ways that, like the French, I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but this new bill about taking a tax and then allowing P2P, we need to experiment with some business models, and we need to prove that there are other ways to do innovation other than the old idea of only innovation. Because if you look at intellectual property law, the idea is that innovation can only happen inside of big companies, and that it's protected by intellectual property, and that software patents and things like this prevent people from stealing ideas. Well, if you look at the open internet, almost all of the good ideas started outside of the big companies, and even the big companies, the smart ones like IBM, are giving up their intellectual property. And so this whole idea of sharing is bad for business, or sharing steals jobs, or sharing steals value, we need to show that this isn't true and make it more than just a political movement. That's why I'm doing a lot of work in the business side, because I want to convince the corporate executives that, no, we're not here to be just anarchists, well, not all of us, but that we're actually trying to contribute to society that's going to flourish. And I think that, you know, we have to have good examples for this. Global voices is really important. And I think that people always say, oh, there's digital divide, blah, 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 blah. Well, even if there's digital divide, you can have intermediaries. You can have people who go, like Witness, that creates documentaries with these people who write blogs from these countries, and amplifying the voice and helping people who translate. Creative Commons is one good way because it allows people to translate without asking for permission. But we really need to make this a global network because our problems are global, and it's really, really interesting what some of these people have to say in developing countries. And also, I mean, they're not developing countries really, but in Europe, you have this whole communication with Eastern Europe that still needs to happen, and I think that a lot of this amplification is important. One really important thing, and this is kind of in response to the article from Frank, I think many people have an overestimation of the power of these conspiracies. I've given talks at the Trilateral Commission, which is considered supposed to be a really scary place. It's not. It's just a bunch of really powerful people who sit around, and they talk like normal people and make decisions like normal people. It's the same at Davos. It's the same in these big country bureaucracies. Actually, it's more like the movie Brazil than it is like 1984. And the thing is that there is a natural inertia for things to happen. Like I tried to stop the privacy, I tried to stop the national ID bill in Japan, and I got 80% of the public, all the media, more than half the politicians to vote okay for my moratorium until the privacy bill was passed. And it went through anyway, and I tried to find who was the guy who pushed it through and everything, and I finally talked to one of the politicians and said, oh, it just went through because it would have been too confusing and disruptive if we stopped it, even though we all agreed it was a bad idea. And this is what I mean by a broken democracy, and this is what I mean that there really isn't a conspiracy. There was no person, that was why it was difficult, there was no person who was out to do the national ID. It just became a $600 million project that just started rolling along, and you couldn't stop it. It's like a tanker with the driver dead over the wheel. That's what we're fighting against. And we're fighting against momentum. We're not fighting against really smart people with lots of information. And actually, we're smarter than them, which is another thing that's important. We have less power, but we're smarter, and we can coordinate better. And I can say anything here because I doubt any of them will be watching this video. And I think that really, I would like everyone to have the guts right now to question authority and hack the system. I'm in a lot of these places, and they need this kind of input from the outside. They need conferences like this. They can point at and say, look at all these smart people are saying this. They need people to argue with them. And it's really not the right time to roll over and give up. As Tim said, be furious, be serious, be angry. You know, fight for things, and you'll get them. And I think that you do need. There's a lot of tutorials during this week on how to be tactical, how to hack the system. But really, it's the time isn't to sit around and give up. The time is really, and really the point is to question authority, because a lot of the smart people who have authority, at least the good ones, are questioning themselves as well. And so they would like to hear, not all of them, but some of them would like to hear. So anyway, I'm going to try to stop now in case I have time to get some discussion and allow people to have their free speech. Thank you. Tim, should I take questions, or should I take some? Okay, comments. And comments are fine as well.
I've got one question relating to the what would you say, watch lists like in Japan. Well, what do you think will be the effect of terrorism, of imprisoning people that are not terrorists yet?
Yes.
On the growth of terrorism.
You mean like the Minority Report stuff, right? Well, I think that already they imprison a lot of people who they think have information. And in Japan, it's very common practice to actually question a lot of people and harass people who have information even if they're not involved. I think that the practice in the United States is ramping up, and I think we need to fight it. I don't have a really good response other than that it's happening already, and we need to fight it. And that's my fear, is to end up on a list and be questioned. Okay. I guess everybody's leaving, Tim. Should I switch with the next speaker? All right. Thank you.